Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Wagner, and I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing at InEight. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on There is a Better Way to Manage Project Document Workflows. Leading today's webinar is Ryan Kirshen and Daniel Gilb. Ryan brings 20 years of experience in engineering, operations, construction, procurement, and change management to the table. Prior to joining InEight in 2016, Ryan spent 7 years with Kiewit and served as their Director of Purchasing and Materials Management for their energy division. He is currently Director of Product Management for the document management products at InEight. He and his team are focused on delivering solutions that support comprehensive document management and control, ensuring organizations have access to the right documents at the right time and in the right place. Daniel, originally from Australia, joined InEight as part of the QA software acquisition in 2018. Over the last 8 years, he's implemented and supported hundreds of construction document management solutions throughout America, Asia, and Australia across numerous industries and markets. Daniel is currently the project delivery lead for InEight Document and is responsible for the successful delivery of all of our American clients. Just a couple of quick administrative notes. All the attendees on the phone are currently muted. But if you have a question, please enter it in the GoToWebinar question dialog box. We'll field these questions at the end of the presentation. Also, in the coming days, we'll distribute a link to the presentation so you can watch it again. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today to discuss and talk a little bit about project workflow management. As we consider our projects and a lot of the challenges around workflow and how we manage data flow and information on our projects, the area that we really wanted to focus on today is really around paper-based forms and the workflows there and how we can replace them electronically. So when we consider the challenges with paper-based forms, there's really a lot of opportunities that come to mind of what can be replaced. On any given project, you may have inspections, you may have finding reports, you may have requests for information, opportunities of nonconformance, all that need to be documented, tracked, and progressed. If you're doing that from a paper or even, from certain electronic methods like spreadsheets, still those methods require not only someone to fill them out, but also someone to distribute them. And then tracking their completion, again, becomes a manual step. That form must route through its process. Someone must log that, yes, what has been required has now been done, and then a piece needs to be updated on that form or in a separate location saying that the closeout has been completed. Oftentimes, with these processes, they backlog around certain bottlenecks. That bottleneck can be a person. That can be people in different locations. How do I transmit that information from one location to another? And then if we consider outside of the challenges around an individual form, let's say how does something get from one person's desk to another, we have even more challenges regarding the aggregation of those forms. How do I find the form I was looking for? How do I track that individual process? What if that information really needs to link to drawings and other data points, pictures of my project? How do I associate that to my workflow? And then once it's all said and done, if I'm a construction project and I need to get all this information to the owner, how do I turn that over? And then finally, how do I diagnose areas for improvement? How do I, based on the amount of information flowing, know that I need to make a change that's going to make my project and my overall outcome more efficient? How do I report on the information that's coming out of my workflows and out of my processes? So what is our solution around these paper-based and manual workflows? Well, the solution is electronic workflow, electronic document, and we believe InEight Document is really one of the best places to do that. So if you look over on the left, you have an example of an electronic request for information form. You see very straightforward that it has one single unique RFI number. That number is going to live with that form throughout its life cycle. It's going to allow that number to be linked to other areas of your project. If you have a drawing that needs to be associated to that RFI, you can actually link those two together. The workflows are standard and predefined, and the processes are consistent. We know we're going to establish the RFI, we're going to put out the response, somebody's going to review it, and somebody's going to approve it. However, they're still flexible enough that if you need to get additional information during the process, you can send it out to someone else for further review. The closeout really is completed as part of the flow, and then all of your data is saved. So the information that you populated in, when it took place, where it was associated, all of that is captured as part of the form. So then when you turn over the project, you can see the RFIs by area of the project. You can see the RFIs by type, by discipline. Whatever that key metadata is that you need to capture, you can capture that as part of the process. And then finally, anything in here is available for reporting. If you need detailed reports, if you need key information surfaced to really target challenging areas or areas for improvement, all that's available to you at a glance. So now let's move into the product itself to see how this would work. So what you see here on the screen is a standard nonconformance report. So this is an electronic form that was pre-built in advance with an established workflow associated to it. So let's very briefly step through what is included in this report, in this form. So someone initiated this nonconformance, and you see this particular one says exposed rebar in concrete for section 3A. What happened is a finding was made around some form of the process. The nonconformance was initiated, and it started its way through the workflow. It came to another individual whose responsibility in that process was to investigate the finding. You can see the multiple pieces that were included within this workflow. What is the message? What did you determine to be the cause? What's the remediation? And what was the action? That individual completed their piece of the workflow as well. They did their investigation on the nonconformance. Again, no paper has been involved, and all of this has happened electronically. The routing from one individual to another, as well as the statusing of the overall workflow. Now it's made it to me, and right now I'm acting as Gary Harrison, who's probably the engineering manager or the designer on this job. I have provided my message around this particular nonconformance. I say yes, that your remedial action is appropriate, and I'm going to actually progress this form. I can now complete the action and say, what do I feel is the appropriate case? I put in my message, and I can say, yes, I'm going to send this for resolution and complete the nonconformance and move forward. Or is my message that there is additional investigation that needs to take place, and I'm going to reroute it back into the workflow for further work. That's one kind of straightforward example around this electronic workflow in this nonconformance report. But there's additional advantages to doing this electronically. Outside of the information gathered and the report itself, or the nonconformance report, I can see active comments from the flow, none in this one in particular. I can also look at the review details. I can see who were the reviewers, when they completed their reviews, and then how long was their review scheduled for, so if we're lagging behind. And if we happen to be lagging behind, we have a full dedicated audit log and history behind the form. So we can see the details of when information was placed into the form, how many times it was reviewed. There may be times where you have an expectation that a nonconformance is completed within 7 days. And maybe it takes longer than that, but by reviewing a detailed audit and history log, you can see that that delay was really validated and got you the results you needed. So if we move from the example of one individual form, and now let's look at the forms in aggregate. So again, in a paper-based form world, these could be stacked up in multiple file cabinets, and they could be filed by area or by form type. By bringing these into an electronic register, all of that information is available in one spot. So what we see here is a list of all forms currently on our project. We can see who initiated the form, and we could sort by that information. If we have multiple contractors, subcontractors, third parties influencing our project, we could see who initiated our forms. At a quick glance, we could even go and just filter by individual form types. So here you see all of the active forms that are available on our project. Let's filter down to the request for information, or RFI forms. Now we can see some active RFIs on our current project. Let's look at the one here that's closed out and get a feel for that same information that we saw before. Again, here's a completed form. We can see who that form went to. We can see the details around what was requested, the design review, and through it. We can see the review status, how long it took and who the reviewers were, and again, the detailed history within the audit log. Now, there may be times that you as an individual want a quicker view of what is my information? What do I need to work on today? Now, you certainly could come to a register and filter for your information. We also surface that information, though, at a graphical dashboard level. So now, right when I log into the project, me as an individual can see that I have 2 overdue items waiting for me. And those items are RFI forms. Now, if I need to expedite the entire project, it's quite possible that I may need to see what is my overdue status across the entire project. What do I need to look at here? Well, if my access is appropriate, I can view that same information across the entire company. So now I can see not only the 20 overdue forms here, but I can also see just outstanding statuses and where those lie as well. So all of these are independent workflows through independent groups. So moving back to our kind of overview, what you see here is kind of a graphical representation of what we just did. A very basic workflow. So here was our identify the nonconformance. It went through its 3 steps. Once it made it to the final step, which was the quality manager, that manager signed off and said, how much information is needed, or have we really completed the flow? If they think that the workflow did its job and the amount of information gathered was appropriate, they can complete it. Now, this is a very simple version, but we also have the opportunity for much more complex flows. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel now to kind of walk us through one of those more complex scenarios.
Thank you, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, projects do have need for more complex workflows as well to better track and accommodate for the life cycle for things like requests for information, for non-conformances, for design changes, whatever it may be. Now, when we look at a more complex workflow for a request for information, for example, we can see that this particular request for information is initiated and then it's issued directly to the design team. That design team, in this particular case, has the ability to add their own comments. If they feel like they need some additional input from the project engineer, they are able to issue that to the project engineer as part of an optional step. This is an optional step. It's not something that is required to be completed in order for the form to proceed in its workflow. So the design team, if they decide to move that on, they can simply send that particular form onto the third-party project verifier. This can be someone from an external company, maybe an owner's representative, someone that's individual to the project to verify the content and make sure that it's in line. Once the verifier agrees or approves or sends that through the process, it'll then go on to the client for the client's review or approval. If they need to make any changes, they can return it to the project verifier, who may need to go back to the design team for additional comments or additional information. Once this form is agreed and approved through its entire life cycle, it'll then go through to that quality manager role, someone who's then responsible for updating drawings, if a change request needs to be raised, or if that particular RFI can just be closed out. So I'm actually going to now jump back into the product and give you an example of a more detailed request for information. So I have here an RFI that I've already started the creation process for. I can see the RFI details where I've got my title or the description of my request for information. I can see the question that I'm asking. In this case, it's related to a steel clash. If it's related to any particular drawings, I can put those drawing details in here. I can also attach files from my computer. We can also attach documents from our document register, or if you wanted to attach a piece of correspondence or link these items, you can do that through the system as well. Now I've attached a file here to my RFI. Now this particular request for information, we spoke about the workflow where it's going from our creation or originator screen to the design team for their comments. We would then have that project engineer, which is the optional step, our project verifier, the client, and then our quality manager as the final step. If at the top of the screen, I can also see my 4 action reviewers. So I can see that this particular form is going to go through Adrian, through Frank, and then to Joe. I can select my distribution by clicking on Select Reviewers and choose my civil RFI. I can also configure the workflow. So if Adrian is no longer on the project or needs to be, is currently on leave, I can actually replace him as part of that design team review step. So Adrian can be removed from the review, and I can add his counterpart in this case, which is James. I've now got Frank and James as reviewers in this design team step. Now, James, I may want him just to simply be an optional reviewer. Making him an optional reviewer will leave Frank as that mandatory reviewer, meaning that once Frank completes his review, it will move on. James is given the option to review the RFI, but he doesn't need to in order for it to move on. And this is just going to ensure that we don't have any holdups or delays. If Frank or James are similar job roles on the project, I can list them as either reviewers. So once either Frank or James completes their review of this particular RFI, it will then move on in its workflow. So I'm just going to now complete my action as the originator and start this RFI. And you'll notice now when I go to my review status that this particular RFI is being issued now to Frank and James. They'll both receive a notification and they'll be able to update that design team review section as needed. At the top of the screen, you'll also notice that this particular RFI has been given a unique reference number. This reference number is going to be tracked through its entire life cycle. We can also report on the forms and their current statuses. So an InEight document does come with 70 to 80 standard reports that are inbuilt into the system. On the left-hand side, I'm going to select my form reports and just run a forms summary report. I can choose to filter this by the form type, and in this case, I'm going to specifically filter for my requests for information. I can put in some parameters around my search, such as the form reference number or any of the other metadata or details against the particular form, and click on search. Now, what you can see here is a form summary. So this report that we've run is going to give you the details of the RFIs that exist within the system. On the left-hand side, you can see the form reference numbers, which are hyperlinks, which will allow us to click on these to show those items in detail. I can see the status, the current status for each of those particular forms. I can see when they were created, the subject, and so on. Now, closing the loop on that rule locating plan, I can click on this particular link, and this will load that RFI that we looked at earlier. From within the RFI screen, I can review the details of the RFI, I can view the review status, and I can review the history, as Ryan showed earlier. Now, we have given you some examples of simple and of complex workflows, of a non-conformance report and of requests for informations. The form workflow is very flexible and configurable, which can be used to accommodate extremely simple workflows or extremely complicated workflows and anything in between. Comparing electronic forms or through an electronic system like InEight document to the paper-based platform, or even to something like Microsoft Excel, where you're pushing forms through a workflow, you can see that the data collection and the management of that data and tracking is much simpler, and it's a lot more efficient. It's easier to attach files, and the workflow is automated through its entire life cycle. So tracking and viewing the full history of that particular form as it's moved through its process is going to make life a lot easier and ensure that things aren't getting delayed or stuck or even just sitting on someone's desk. And finally, we can also see that the reporting side of it is going to add insight and value to the management team in order to be able to run summary reports, but also to be able to run more detailed reports on the individual tasks and roles.
Thanks, Ryan and Daniel. Really appreciate that. So why don't we now go into the QA portion, and we have a few questions. So the first one that came in is, would this platform be able to document and report for the change management process as well?
Good question. Yeah, and absolutely. So there are roughly 80 reports available right out of the box with the document product, and many of those focus around the data that you collect within your forms, not just where those forms are within their workflow in terms of who has the active status and what's the next step, but also around the data that you are collecting. So if you have dedicated forms that are working through RFIs, the change process, the change management process on your project, you can absolutely use that reporting to see not only where you are, but the type of data you're collecting and your status within that process.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question we have is, most of the examples you showed were based on sequential workflows. Can we set up a parallel step workflow as well?
Yeah, there's even more flexibility than what we showed within the workflow processes. Yes, you can absolutely do parallel steps within a workflow. You can add multiple parallel approvers and assign those individuals as optional or either. So you can have multiple people approving a step. You can have multiple people on kind of a first come, first served basis, or you can just have alternates available in case of variances in availability. There's also the opportunity to do default review teams as well. So you may have, depending on the issue, a few standard review teams, and the person kicking off the workflow may be able to decide whether that goes to review team 1 or review team 2. That's an option as well.
Great. It was discussed how we can link a form to a document or correspondence. Can we link a form to other forms or other project items like photos as well?
Absolutely. And really that linking is bidirectional as well. So while a form can incorporate a document, it can incorporate a project photo, anything that might need to be reviewed during the process. You can also kick off forms relative to documents, and or link a particular RFI to an element within your model, as an example. So lots of flexibility in where you link forms, but also that relationship can go both directions.
Thanks. Can I include everyone on the project team in the review process, or just the people in my organization?
So yes, as you are looking at your own administration capabilities within the tool, you can set up third parties, owners, clients, engineers, designers, whoever needs to participate in that process, and then you can assign the level of security they need. So not only can they participate within the process fully, you can also limit to what they might see as a part of that process.
Great. How are members of the review team notified when it's their turn in the review process?
You know, I think you saw briefly that when anyone logs in, you have that dashboard capability that would highlight items within their individual workflows or past due items. But along with that, they also receive an email notification notifying them that they have a step to proceed on, and then giving them the link then to go directly in and work on that item.
Great. Looks like we have one more question. You briefly showed some of the dashboarding for reviewing on a specific project. Does this tool have anything where I can review document information across multiple projects?
Absolutely. So there are some portfolio level capabilities that are going to roll up that information across your entire portfolio. But we also offer an API level of integration that if you have your own reporting platforms and you want to integrate document data to other areas of the project as your own, you can take that API information and make your own custom dashboards as well at a project or a portfolio level. So lots of flexibility to not only execute the processes, but get the value out of the data from them in real time.
Great. Well, it looks like that is all of our questions. So I want to thank Daniel and Ryan for the presentation and for everyone that attended. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will be distributing a link out to the full presentation for people to review, and we will also be posting it to the InEight.com website under Resources Streaming Webinars. Thank you again for everyone for attending, and this concludes our webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.